Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you listening on the Life Online Radio Network, we welcome you in. For those of you joining us on YouTube, we welcome you in. Special thanks to our sponsors, at Affinity WES, that's at Affinity Writing and Editing Services. If you do anything with words, they can help, and at a reasonable rate. And as a multi-time best-selling author myself, I can tell you their rates are quite reasonable. They do charge a fair market rate, but they'll definitely cut you a deal. Speaking of which, our show is supported by book sales. So there's a link in the description box that allows you to directly subsidize our program in return for some pretty well-crafted pieces of fiction and non-fiction. The information we give away is free, but we still do have to make a living somehow. Oh, it's so nice to be out of financial season again, and very shortly I should be out of the bunker. It gives me a giddy feeling. It's like spring is here already. And just as a total gift, I got thrown Robert Bigelow. I'm sure you've heard of him, but I don't know how much you've heard of him. And curiously, how much you know of him. Robert Bigelow was born in the 1950s and went to university in the 1960s. He made most of his money off real estate. And by real estate, I mean like investing in hotels, businesses, the economy-style lodges that we're used to today. And he's very, very private about his background. If you look at his Wikipedia page, one of the curious things about him is it doesn't list a personal life for him. It mentions his wife, but not her name. Now, you look up the average person, it'll show you how many people they've married, how many people they've divorced, how many kids they had with each. But with him, it says nothing. With an easy, shallow dive, I know I could uncover this information. But there's so much else interesting with Robert Bigelow, I thought it would be better just to let the man have his privacy. If he wants his home life off the table, that doesn't always mean there's something sinister. The greatest people in history have tried to keep their children out of the spotlight. So in this, I will definitely show the man the respect he deserves. I haven't really divined whether he comes from money or not, but he was able to put himself through university. Admittedly, in the 1960s, it was completely different. You could put yourself through university off a simple part-time job, which is an opportunity that doesn't really exist anymore. Think of that. In a matter of 50 years, the idea of supporting yourself going to university on a part-time job, even if you do live at home with your parents, is a near impossible goal. Still possible. You can still get scholarships. You can still get bursaries. You can still get awards. It's just very competitive and very difficult. And most kids are not even taught about these things in schools. Now, I don't really know whether he had a bursary or anything like that supporting him, but I can tell you that he graduated and managed to make money. But he himself admits, even at an early age, he was interested in more than just money. I like people who are interested in more than just money. I'm interested in more than money. I would love to spend my time talking to you guys every day, although that would be hard. I'd love to spend my time writing. I would love to be all about knowledge and wisdom and opportunity. Sadly, we don't live in that world. But here's a man who had decided at a young age, at 12 years old, not 12 o'clock, 12 years old, that he wanted to go after UFOs, other planets, and things in the 1960s would have gotten you laughed at. Remember, this is before anybody had set foot on the moon. They had Martian probes planned, they had flybys of planets, But the Viking rovers hadn't even set down. There weren't even those first blurry images that would eventually show us the face on Sidonia, the pyramids, and all the images that intrigue us. Before any of that happened, he still decided he wanted to go there. He worked away and he picked away, and let's be honest, success did not happen overnight. It was till the mid-1990s where he really started concentrating on his passion. He's in his 70s right now, and he's more tight-lipped than ever. He forms an interesting dyad with George Knapp, the weekend host of Coast to Coast AM, the #1 rated overnight talk show in the country. Well, in the world. And for some reason, George Knapp has a kinship with him. Robert Bigelow will share information with him, will tell him things that he won't tell anybody else. He's still very tight-lipped, but it's interesting how George Knapp is able to get so much information out of him and so many other people. Remember, George Knapp is also the one that broke the Bob Lazar story, the scientist who supposedly walked away from Area 51 while knowing their secrets. I can't evaluate Bob Lazar. He is a very enigmatic person, and perhaps in a future episode I will deal with that. But let's get back to Robert Bigelow. In the 1990s, he suddenly started using his vast fortune, and I guess he told his wife at this point, to start research into rockets and space stations and all sorts of things that were possible. Now, NASA had been experimenting with an inflatable space module, and they decided it wasn't really working for them. It was a lot of development time, money was going into it, it wasn't showing the returns that they wanted. Robert Bigelow took that. His technicians worked on it for about 10-15 years. They deployed a couple experimental ones, and they finally got the thing working. In 2016, they deployed one of his modules on the International Space Station, where the international astronauts are taking advantage of it to this day. So whatever you'll say about Robert Bigelow, the man's a success, and an unqualified one. Yes, he's had difficult times to work through. There wouldn't be a single millionaire out there, billionaire out there that hasn't gone through some difficult times. The difference is when Bob Bigelow puts his signature on a piece of paper, the man's betting with confidence. He's not just playing with house money here, it's his own money he's putting down. He's saying, this is what I'm willing to invest in this. So he formed Bigelow Aerospace, where they were, how shall I say this? They were monkeying around with space. They had clear plans, they knew what they wanted to do, but how to get there wasn't so clear. He had the idea of a space hotel, but keep in mind that he was having this idea in the early 2000s. SpaceX was still a dream at this point. And to be frank, it's still a dream at this point for them to be doing anything like that. We're a heck of a lot closer in 2021, but Robert Bigelow was dreaming ahead of his time. That's because he knew things. He knew things a lot of us didn't. Sometime in the 1990s, he bought a ranch that's known as Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. Skinwalkers is a term used by the First Nations people, and it basically refers to people that can wear different skins and walk around among us. So, a toad, for example, or a spirit resembling a toad, could wear the skin of a man and walk around as a man. It's kind of similar to the original idea for berserkers and werebears, that a Viking would be able to put on the skin of a wild animal and take on its own wild attributes, thus aiding him and making him stronger and better able to fight. The same is pretty much true of skinwalkers, although the First Nations seem to attribute a lot more powers to them. And Skinwalker Ranch has been the epicenter of a lot of paranormal activity. Not only are there nightly UFO vigils there, but supposedly the ranch itself is haunted. And people have gone there before 1995 and starting up again about 2016 because Robert Bigelow sold the ranch. He bought it and sold it. He kept it for about 20 years. He did what he needed to do, and then he got rid of the thing. A lot of people move houses, but this is not a man that we're talking about that just has one house. He has mansions everywhere. A lot has gone strange in the past few years regarding Robert Bigelow. The Air Force, and I guess now the Space Force, trusted him with a lot of documents that don't normally get trusted to somebody who they don't have implicit faith in. He's been implicated in a lot of UFO research, and as a matter of fact, there have been people who have alleged that he has material from outer space. Not just moon rocks, not just Mars rocks, but actual built structures made by hands that were not human. I'm not talking dolphins, I'm not talking octopi, I'm talking real, honest-to-God aliens. Supposedly, if rumors are to be true. The New York Times has whispered that they have a FOIA request that has been granted, and it indicates this, but we're still waiting for the FOIA request to come through. FOIA is Freedom of Information Act, so to make things simpler, we'll just put it down as FOIA. The inflatable space station technology would be light years beyond when you think about it. We're used to sending up big metal cylinders and clunking them together with screws and stuff like that in orbit. But an inflatable space station, not only a space station but a habitat, would be a huge savings. All that bulk you don't need to haul up. Instead of having a gigantic SpaceX-style Falcon 9 Heavy burning itself up in the atmosphere, you could send up on something smaller. Because it doesn't need to have those big fairings and everything. Just shove the thing, deflate it, get it up there, hook up a CO2 canister. Well, no, you'd hook up an oxygen canister, but most of us have experience with CO2 canisters. And it's as simple as that. You press the button, it inflates, it is good to go. Now this stuff isn't just made of tin foil. This stuff is supposedly made of like a Kevlar weave. Kevlar is the same stuff the police use for body armor. And what's to say it doesn't involve stuff other than that? Patents go all the time. They're scrutinized, they're looked at. And Bob Bigelow has been holding his engineering bag of tricks to himself. He's got cards in the deck that he can play with. And he's not afraid to whip one out when he needs it. Unlike Elon Musk, where we can see his slow but steady progress, Bob Bigelow just seems to be able to make something happen. Through his many years, Robert Bigelow has shifted his focus. In 2020, Bigelow Aerospace let go of all of its members of staff and halted operations after 20 years of business. Now, 2020 was, of course, a difficult year with the pandemic and the virus. Aerospace was slowed down, but it wasn't really slowed down. Elon Musk was still allowed to go ahead with his operations. Lockheed and Boeing were allowed to go ahead with their operations. But they wouldn't let Robert Bigelow go ahead with his. He had to shut down. What's curious about this is to send up his commercial space station, he had partnered with the United Launch Alliance. Now, this is where things start to show you how deep into the black world. By black world, I'm not talking hip-hop culture. I'm talking about the dark part of the defense budget. Because the United Launch Alliance is a partnership between none other than Lockheed and Boeing. Yes, Boeing. Remember them? They're still in the fighter game. They're still in the aviation game. They're still out there. They have a rocket that they have proposed to go to the moon that's being developed. The Starliner, I believe it's called. Boeing still has tens of thousands, if not more, airliners running around the world. They still have their F-18s that are in service with multiple nations. They're a big partner with lots of different people. Boeing's not going out of business anytime soon, despite the fact that supposedly the pandemic killed the tourism industry. So no one's buying new double-decker 747s, no one's buying any 777s or any of that sort of stuff. But Boeing's not worried. Robert Bigelow got shut down, but they didn't. And then we look to their partner in the United Launch Alliance, Lockheed, a name whispered in back alleys, a place with a laboratory so secret it calls itself Skunk Works because it's designed to defend against everything. You might know Lockheed. They have a prestigious lineage dating all the way back to World War II. In the modern era, they're known for such projects as the F-117 stealth bomber, the F-22 Raptor stealth fighter, and the infamous F-35. Boeing is a good company, good in relative speaking. They're reliable, they get the job done. They're like a Ford pickup truck. Lockheed is where you go when you want the Corvette. With all the markings and the LED lights, the spinning rims, and the supercar stereo. Lockheed does that kind of thing. Boeing will get you there, Lockheed will get you there in style. So, what are two companies that directly competed on both the F-22 and F-35 project putting their resources together into the United Launch Alliance? Their business plans shouldn't allow for it. It would be like if McDonald's and Burger King launched the same burger on the same day, calling it the Unity Burger. Which is probably a big stunt, and guys, if you do it, I want some of the feedback from it. I want a little cheddar in there. But in seriousness, I know they'll never mention Silverlight on their menus. That's just a little joke between us. Two virtual monopolies, including Lockheed, which is pretty much a state-funded enterprise. They make their money in the black projects in the military area. Boeing does have interests outside of it, but Lockheed is pure military, pure government. Yet they're allowed to collude, which is the exact word when two people work together to make things in their advantage. It's collusion. You may have heard this word used in reference to baseball because they have anti-collusion laws. You might have heard it with sports, saying that people are colluding to keep a particular player out of the league. And I'm not saying no to either of those because it absolutely does happen. Think about it. If you know a particular customer and they need 30 loads a week, and you only have the capacity to do 10 loads, but your buddy can do 10 loads and his buddy can do 10 loads, you collude, you give them one price, and as long as the three of you make sure you've got the same low price, or within the same with a few little perks here and there, you know the three of you are going to get the contract. Now that's what's going on with the United Launch Alliance. They're quietly sharing the profits between them. Yes, individually they could both make more, but Boeing and Lockheed have swallowed up so many companies over the years that they don't need to go toe-to-toe, battle for battle, blow for blow. They know they're perfectly comfortable being who they are, doing what they're doing. Reason this becomes relevant is I was looking at some World War II videos the other day. And I forget what fighter it was. It was not a major fighter that you'd recognize. But it was specifically designed because it was believed that North American and Boeing and those manufacturers had too much work. And so to diversify, they made this other fighter. Like I said, don't quote me on it. When it's late at night and I'm watching YouTube, I'm sorry. My memory's not fully engaged. I'm just enjoying the show, looking for little details like that. Meanwhile, in Europe, they were doing the exact same thing. The British were using everything they could. The de Havilland mosquito was put together using wood, because wood was not a rare commodity. It was pretty common. They could use furniture warehouses and diversify their portfolio, not just using steel and aluminum and precious metals like that. They could literally use wood, and instead of specially trained metal workers, they could use woodworkers, which they had a whole ton of back in the 1940s. Same with Germany, same with Russia. They would find a factory that wasn't doing very much work and say, hey, how would you like to produce this? And they would make it work one way or the other. It's kind of interesting to note the one plant that absolutely failed miserably in World War II. That would be Ferdinand Porsche's plant. He was supposed to build the tanks from World War II, the Panzers, the Tigers, all that sort of thing. But he got too complicated, he over-engineered, and that's supposedly why his tanks didn't run all over the West and over the East. They apparently would have been pretty well engineered, but he just couldn't get them working. But you look around today, and Porsches, wow, they have a value. No one looks at a Skoda and thinks it has value, despite the fact I think they're a pretty practical car. A Lada is a joke here in the West after so many years of the Cold War hanging over our heads. But we see that Corvette, we see that Porsche. Ooh, there's some engineering. Now, I'm not really a car guy, but the point is, at one point in the very recent history, governments realized that to put all your eggs in one basket is a fatal way to pursue anything. And they would commission multiple programs on everything so that they could have the best of both worlds. Maybe get one thing that would be better in some areas and another that would be better in others. You wanted tractors. You would have GM build one and Chrysler build one, and whichever one was better, you'd buy that. But you'd buy a few of the other one too, and maybe you'd find out it works good in jungles, whereas the other one works good in deserts. It's using your excess capacity, and in the event of war, excess capacity can win you the war. It's interesting, in the modern day, excess capacity has gone completely out the window in favor of streamlined supply lines. Now, it is cheaper to have a single source going to a single customer, but this also results in countless delays. Companies are saying they're waiting on a particular product to get in their door, whether it's screws, whether it's apples, it's whatever they need to turn their product out the door and get it rolling into whatever it's going to be. We've forgotten that completely. And that's why we have Boeing and Lockheed, supposedly mortal rivals, are colluding together in the United Launch Alliance. And poor Bob Bigelow is not going to get to see his space hotel because the United Launch Alliance is busy and he's had to disband Bigelow Aerospace. I also bring this up because I mentioned earlier Bob Bigelow owned Skinwalker Ranch for over 20 years. That's a long time to be looking into things. And keep in mind, Skinwalker Ranch, again, we're not only seeing UFOs, we're not only seeing ghosts, we're seeing all sorts of paranormal phenomena. If you had a place like that, you'd be tempted to open it up for ghost tours. You'd have all those paranormal shows all over the country paying you left, right, and center just for the honor of being able to go into there and look around. Not Bob Bigelow. He had enough money that he could just sit back and say, no, my ranch, I'm keeping it. The reason this becomes interesting is he monopolized that ranch for 20 years. Now, why would a man with a real estate empire and an interest in outer space want to be messing around with possible UFOs and possible ghosts? Well, we've previously established that he was part of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification and Identification Program, ATIP, which is the eventual successor to Blue Book, looking at UFOs. And Bob Bigelow did want to go to space. The thing is, you don't get to space by looking at UFOs. If I sit a bunch of very intelligent 18-year-olds down who are all the tops of their class, and I show them a jet going over and tell them I want that same jet, let's have you make it, they're not going to know how to start. They may come up with a basic copy of it. It's going to be nothing like the real thing, though. That's not an insult to 18-year-olds. I'm not one of these special snowflake people who believes the younger generation gets away with everything. I like to poke fun of it on occasion, but I know 18-year-olds and 8-year-olds, all that sort of thing, are just as intelligent today as they ever have been. That wasn't why he was there. If he had the recovered material, and if he had Skinwalker Ranch in his possession, what was it he might be working on? This is where things get interesting. Because in June 2020, Robert Bigelow founded the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies. That's consciousness studies. Although curiously, it looks at investigations into life after death. So it's not really consciousness studies. It would be subconscious studies or otherworldly consciousness. But not consciousness. He's not studying what you're doing. He wants to know what happens in the next world. Now, from a picture, he looks in pretty good health. Hope when I'm his age, I look that fit. I might not be seeing things, but he's still relatively trim. Looks like he works out a little bit. Got a bit of shaggy hair and a bit of a beard going on, but facial hair hasn't been an issue since the 1960s. He looks a little bit of like a nutty professor, but a gentle and kindly one. And that's exactly what he wants you to believe. The truth be told, he's not there just to be a big friendly kid and look after what he wants. The man knows how to make money. And even though he didn't get his space venture off the ground, he did prove that he was able to do what he needed to do at the price that he could do it. He could reassemble that team tomorrow with a few changes, of course. The best and the brightest always get hired away. But he could still bring that knowledge together and put it together. Now, the difference between Robert Bigelow and Elon Musk is Elon Musk is about 30 years younger. So Elon Musk can afford to wait another 20, 30 years to wind up going off planet. Robert Bigelow doesn't have that kind of time. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't really have anything against the man. If he was involved in black projects in the secret world, and he does have all the goodies that we've all been hoping to get a hold of, he's doing his job by keeping his mouth shut. He only would have been given such play toys like alien hardware if he signed non-disclosure agreements, all sorts of crazy stuff that you and I cannot imagine that say he cannot open his mouth without express permission. And the penalties to that aren't just you go to jail, they generally are you disappear. It's scary to think how many people have disappeared. And so far, Bob Lazar hasn't disappeared because I think they fed him just enough disinformation so that he would prove to be a useful puppet. He saw what he saw, some of it was true, some of it was not, and they let him go, just so that way they could say, look at this little lunatic out there, he doesn't know a thing about what's going on. Or worse, they're playing a more sinister game and saying, he does know what's going on, but since we planted just a little lie inside that truth, no one's going to believe it. Either way, this isn't about Bob Lazar, but it'll come back to him in a little bit. Now, Robert Bigelow, at 70 years old, is justifiably curious what happens in the next life. He's done his time, he's done his bit for king and country, and now he wants to know where he's going next. Skinwalker Ranch was useful for that for a long portion of his life. But he already has the data he needs from there. He has everything possible. Not that he stripped the place, because I don't think you could, but he's already stripped all of the information out of there that he hopes to get. For 20 years, he had his scientists, technicians, and whoever he could have the run of the place. He even had an almost agreement with the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. And the idea he had, which I think was actually really clever, was to kind of form small combat teams. And you get a call, say there was a UFO sighting in, Idaho. And you'd call up the local Idaho chapter of MUFON, and they'd have 3 or 4 people who'd be able to get into a car at that moment, go out, explore, see whether they could see this, get first-hand evidence. Whatever it was they could, or what they needed, they'd be ready to go. Personally, I think that is smart. If you're trying to catch something that can disappear at a moment's notice, be ready to mobilize very fast. Again, for Robert Bigelow, I take nothing away from his intelligence. Quite the opposite. I think he's playing a very, very smart game. And his interest in the afterlife, it's going to benefit him first. Now, the only question is, he's known for sharing his secrets with virtually nobody. So he has these people in his Bigelow Institute for Conscious Studies. They're going to know what's going on, but as a private citizen with private industry, he's under no obligation to share that information. In fact, he could even charge a fee for it. That's an interesting set of statements to put together. If he finds out the secret to eternal life, and he decides to start sharing it for money, kind of sounds like a cult. Whether it's right or not is no longer relevant. The fact is, he'll be able to charge money for his secrets. And that secret is your eternal soul. Or at least his perception of it. A bit of a scary thought, but I'm not going to leave you on that. Because Robert Bigelow, like I said, I don't think is an evil man by any sense of the word. He's just a very brilliant man, and he's going to make some money off you. Now let's compare this to somebody whose name has come up a couple times in this episode, Bob Lazar. Once again, a man who's very friendly with George Knapp. George Knapp just has this knack to find interesting stories. Back in 1989, and I remember I was watching the news when this happened, they had a man come on with that old-fashioned black background, and they darkened his face out and altered his voice with that really primitive technology. And he was going on about Area 51, and at that time I was still pretty young. I didn't know what it was. And I watched this with a bit of fascination, but as most things in this world, I figure I'm never going to hear it again, or even about it. A couple of years after that, I start listening to Coast on the regular, which was really my first point of introduction to the deep world of the paranormal. I don't currently listen to Coast for a variety of reasons, but if you do, they are still very authoritative, especially George Knapp. But the curious thing is, instead of it just going away like so many things that I've seen before, if you listen to enough media and you're really careful, you catch snippets of things. For example, it was about the same time, 1989, that I was watching a very grainy image, but it was showing a satellite in orbit firing a neutral particle beam. Now, this isn't the particle beam you're going to see on the Starship Enterprise. It was just an experiment, a very low-power one. But it was still a success. The thing burnt itself out after a couple of shots, but it wasn't made to fight a war. Or at least that's what they told us. And again, in 1989, I saw this thing go up. And in the mid-1990s, I was wishing that I could remember the details of it, because the internet was just coming on board. And I was like, there's all these things I'd love to research, but computers were so different from 1989's dial-up modems and going on to BBSs and chatting with people to 1995 when you could check out your AOL account and do was Alta Vista around back then? I'm just going to say Alta Vista. You did an Alta Vista search. No one had heard of Google. It hadn't been invented. But so much had passed before, I didn't know how I'd even begin to go looking about it. I did my searches for neutral particle beam satellites, what I could remember, and I couldn't get any confirmation on it. I started to doubt myself. And then one day, I was reading Zecharia Sitchin. Yes, the man with the 12th planet and all those wonderful books. I don't cast judgment on them. I think he was a very brilliant man with some unorthodox ideas, but still very intelligent. They're a pleasant read if you haven't read them. Zecharia Sitchin, The 12th Planet, and all of his other books. Even if you don't agree with his evidence, the way that he presents it is still enjoyable. It's like listening to a master story crafter. So if you can't appreciate him for science, you can at least appreciate him for storytelling. And this is in no way sponsored or anything by the Sitchin family. Zecharia Sitchin unfortunately passed away a few years ago. Like I said, if you manage to get to read the books, absolutely do it. The important part is at the end of book 3, I think it's the third book, and he's talking about how a couple Russian space probes went missing over Mars. And then a few seconds later, he mentions the exact same neutral particle beam test that I had watched almost 7 years before. For 7 years, I had thought I was a phony, because the mind plays funny tricks. We've all been there. You think you see one thing, you do another. But no, here's another man, a published author, a relatively well-known author, and he saw the same thing I did and put it in the book. So that's one reason I'm eternally grateful to Zecharia Sitchin, because he taught me, no matter what, stay true to your beliefs, stay true to your thoughts, because you'll be surprised how often that they're true. And that's where I find myself in 2021, talking to you guys on the internet about stuff I don't necessarily believe in, but I have an idea. Compare that to Bob Lazar, who has a very checkered history. For a moment, just for a moment, I want us to pretend. I don't ask you to assume, I ask you to pretend for a little bit. Once we're done this conversation, you may go on to believe whatever you believe. But for right now, let's pretend Bob Lazar was telling the truth. That he went for this mysterious job, they called him up 6 months later, rushed him through to the security complex, and then when he didn't go back to work, they erased his educational certificates, they made fun of him, they marginalized him, and left him without a job. Possible. Stranger things have happened to people. Like I said earlier, people are known to disappear. But they left him alone. I think there's a very good reason for that. They're making an example of him. See, the 1980s and 1990s, things were pretty much running almost the same as they were in the 1960s. The internet pretty much did not exist even towards the later part of that time frame. So your social group was your social group. There were no Facebook friends, there were no Twitter followers, there were no Instagram followers. Your social group was your social group. Maybe you got together at a bar on Fridays. Maybe you're a member of the Freemasons or the Lions Club or any of the other various things that are barely even understood these days. Or maybe you guys just like to get together and watch the game. Whatever your particular enjoyment was, ostracizing you has always been an effective weapon. Going back to the earliest people possible, from back when we were tribal, Paleolithic people, not even hunter-gatherers, just gatherers. The best way to threaten someone's survival would be to kick them out of the tribe. You're no longer part of this family. Good luck surviving out there with the lions, the tigers, and the bears. Oh my. This is where the human sense of humor comes into play a major role. We make light of danger. In that way, we can cope with it better. So, if there's a tiger threatening to break down the walls of our hut, and I poke it with a stick, then, look, the silly thing wasn't smart enough to avoid a stick. Sorry to any animal activists that are listening, but I'm talking about the Paleolithic era. There were no vegans back then. Or maybe they were. I don't know. The evidence isn't there. I take that back. But there were very few vegans. So for thousands, if not millions of years, humans have been able to ostracize their own kind just to make sure that they can put social pressure on them. The kings, queens, emperors, empresses, tribal chiefs, island chiefs all had power because they were the ones that were able to say, that one is no longer allowed. Get rid of him. And nobody would pay attention to you, nobody would help you, nobody would look at you. One of the Roman emperors who escapes my mind is losing Suetonius lately. I'm going to have to reread that. But when he caught one of his soldiers selling his excess grain, because there was a long, hard march, and one soldier had thought to bring excess grain, the soldier sold it. When the emperor found out, he ordered that nobody would feed that soldier. So imagine being a Roman soldier on the march. You're tired, you're hungry, you might have a little bit of wheat, maybe not, and nobody else is allowed to give you a sip of water, a muffin, although I don't think it would be a muffin, a bun, there we go. No one's allowed to lift even that much of a finger to help you. That's ostracization. People do this all the time. They always say, I'm cutting you off. I'm not going to be your friend anymore. And it's a holdover from the days when communities were closer knit than they are now. They weren't spread over multiple continents, all sharing their love of dressing up in fursuits and wandering around. They were a small group of people that kept together because of mutual interests. So imagine if you are a person with a community, you would have no choice but to either go to another community or die. And that's exactly what Bob Lazar did. He had been ostracized. His educational records had been destroyed. Aside from his pay statement, which I can't tell whether it's legitimate or not, he didn't have any record whatsoever of what he had been doing. He has skills. He's a smart man. He obviously knows a little bit about what he's talking about. But to his own admission, he only spent 3 days on the base. So he can't really tell you anything. If I brought you around base board, and it's big enough, probably not the size of Area 51, but I could give you a very confusing tour. Even if I showed you facilities, you'd never be able to find where it was again. And they've shown repeatedly that people's memories can be altered. They take people to a scene and show them things. Everybody remembers something different. So here's a man who's been completely ostracized. Bob Lazar has no choice but to go to George Knapp. George Knapp, to his credit, gives the man a fair shake. I think it's a shame that in modern journalism we've lost the ability to give another person a fair shake. Art Bell used to be a master at it. He'd let the person tell their story until either they proved their point or until they drowned themselves. Modern journalists are too busy trying to put forward an opinion, and they're trying to follow Eric Bischoff's motto, controversy creates cash. Well, Eric Bischoff was right. Controversy does create cash. The problem is, forced controversy creates nothing. You casually flip around the boob tube these days, and you're going to find a whole bunch of talk shows out there. And really, it's just a bunch of talking heads discussing a point. Whether you're looking at your Jerry Springer, Maury Povich style shows where, my boyfriend ain't your baby daddy. Or ones that try to appear more sophisticated, like Phil Donahue and Oprah Winfrey. Or even Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz, who sensationalize problems for their own benefit. But it's not really controversial anymore. We can find things far more controversial on the internet. Daytime TV is kind of weak sauce. It's got nothing going for it anymore. So they have to try to build up passion in the audience. This epidemic was one of the best things that happened to cable TV, because they had the epidemic coverage. Then when that ended, they had it hasn't ended, sorry. When that started to die down a little bit, they had the election coverage. Then after the election coverage, they could get right back into their scare tactics with multiple pandemics, now with its 4 different flavors. And you're sitting there and you have to listen to them. Now, let's go back to believing whatever we believe about Bob Lazar and give him just a slight bit of a doubt and allow him to make his case. What about the media making their case? It's one thing to practice your right to free speech, and I always advise that you practice your right to free speech. But your right to free speech also comes with the right to free consequences. There's the old saying that you can't shout fire in a crowded building. Yes, you can. It's just really dumb. Because you're going to cause a stampede, people could get hurt, they could sue you. So you do have freedom of speech, guaranteed, protected, but you're not free from consequences. So if somebody said something particularly ignorant and stupid, there's nothing I can say here that's going to not offend people. So you can insert whatever comment you like. Apples are not red. Apples can be any color. Darn it. There. Bananas are not green and yellow. They are purple and pink. Now this is not really, it won't cause offense to anybody, but people are going to look at you strange and say, this guy's not all there. And they might find somebody else to socialize with until you calm down, because in this day and age, there's a lot of drugs that people can get a hold of. Medical, recreational, and making your own. And those are the things that we're kind of conditioned by our upbringing. People who are different are people we should be suspicious of. In tribal times, this did hold true to a certain degree, because when you met a new tribe, you didn't know who they were. But the fact that we're all sitting here, all of us, Americans, Canadians, Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, Indians, First Nations, Europeans, Africans, Indians, Siberians, you name it. We're all here because at some point in the past, people managed to get along together. They were able to trade together. They were able to coexist. At the same token, the opposite process was going on, where people were being ostracized, kicked out into the forest. On occasion, they'd hook up with one of the other groups, and on occasion, they'd wander off into oblivion. In 2021, the idea of cancel culture and, internet shaming people is now the new normal. And wouldn't surprise me if I got some of that finding its way around this channel. That being said, I can always start another channel. I can always switch my Facebook profile. Silverlight cannot be contained to one area, and I will not be silenced. But I can be ridiculed. There's a lot of reasons for people to be ridiculed. I severely doubt I have any listeners from the Westboro Baptist Church, but their practices, not their faith, can be ridiculed. You can ridicule their faith, that's part of your free speech, but then it becomes kind of a hate speech situation. So we can ridicule their practices about them showing up to funerals without being invented and trying to paint people as all sorts of crazy things. It's not the first time in history it's happened. Won't be the last either. People love to think they're right, and they like to ostracize and push people away who are different than them. In the present day, we have a perfectly good example of that with the Mennonites. Now, they're not doing it necessarily out of fear, they're not doing it out of shame, but they're choosing to live their existence the way they want it to be, the way it was 200 years ago. There's something admirable about that, especially when it's minus 14 degrees and they got to ride a horse and buggy into town so that they can set their market up. I don't mind that so much, and those people use ostracism very well. Social media ostracism and social media bullying just isn't the same. Yes, you can maybe convince people to unfollow. Yes, you can maybe convince people to cancel. But you can always come back. You've always got an extra life. There's always another way to do what you want to do, to say what you want to say. Ostracism still works. It's just not the same as it was before. So think about it next time you're trying to convince people not to listen to somebody online. If I simply turn around and make fun of you for a spelling mistake, have I really proved my case? No. If I make fun of you because I found a picture of you with a lady of the night, a man of the night, whatever your preference might be, does that prove my point? No. But these are the tactics that are being used on social media to shame people, to ostracize them, to get them away from everybody else. And it's a crying shame that these are the tactics being used. I have seen wonderful debates that really make you ask questions, and I've seen pig muck slinging wrestling matches that make you question the sanity of the people involved. We're not about ostracism. We're not about throwing people out. Robert Bigelow, Bob Lazar, judge them as you will, but make your judgment your own. It's not your job to form a holy crusade about people who think slightly different than you. People with a criminal past? That's a little bit different. There's certain crimes we can agree that are horrible and should never be tolerated in society. That being said, innocent till proven guilty, and then once you've served your debt to society, whatever it is, you're technically back to being free. It doesn't erase what you've done, but it shows that you've moved beyond. But the key thing is innocent until proven guilty. You're allowed to have an opinion. I encourage an opinion. Don't bully somebody based on your opinion. In the past few years, that's all the social media has done. We're not ostracizing anybody anymore. We're just socially bullying them. Screaming matches about, you left a typo here 2 years ago and it shows you don't know anything about guns. And it's just silly. So remember, take a step back. When your only weapon is punctuation or a wrong word or something like that, you don't have a good case. Build good arguments. Build solid relations. Yes, it may be necessary to practice ostracization for your own good. I have certain people I don't pay attention to on social media, And that's just simply because I choose not to be associated with them. I don't get mad at them. But that is your right to choose for you. It's not your right, it is your right to go around and ask other people to join you, like as in a boycott, but it's not your right to browbeat them and force them into joining you. There's no question that the Washington football team had a pretty racist name. But now it sets a dangerous precedent. If we bullied them into it, what about the Vikings? The Vikings are offensive to Scandinavians because Scandinavian people aren't pillaging and raping anymore. I'm sure they wouldn't like their good name tarnished with that. The Buccaneers, pirates, full of scurvy, dogs, whatever you want to call them. That's not who they are. They're a bunch of well-groomed, well-taken care of athletes. They're not setting fire to anybody or shooting cannons at innocent people. But the name evokes that. And like I said, while I'm willing to say the Redskins was a very bad name, trying to ostracize and mobilize against it really opens a dangerous precedent. So if you're going to go out there to start a movement, a revolution, first of all, think of Robert Bigelow, think of Robert Lazar. They've gone through a lot in their lives, and you have to consider the good with the bad. Then consider what you've been through. There's probably not a person I'm speaking to within the reach of my voice that hasn't had bad experiences in their lives. Quite the opposite. I can probably guarantee most of you are listening to this to escape from some part of your life. Whether you're in the shower, whether you're lying down to go to bed, or whether you're on the way to work. The essential thing is you're escaping something. Something you don't particularly like. And that's okay with me. I don't mind it. If I bring you a little bit of joy in a prison cell somewhere, so be it. I hope it's not anybody I disapprove of, but even them, free entertainment I would allow. I'm rambling on. The important thing is, Silverlight does not condone any kind of racism, bullying, etc. We want you to be open-minded. We want you to look to the skies, like Robert Bigelow. When he was 12 years old, he still wanted to know what was out there. Bob Lazar, whether it's in his imagination or it's true, either way it is an interesting story. Zechariah Sitchin, incredibly educated man. Again, look at what he produced. Whether it's true or it's false, it's still darned interesting. So don't just throw those things down and stomp your foot and say, that's not the way it happened. Open it up. Become educated. Become a better human being. And then form a rational opinion. Because your emotions do not constitute a rational opinion, but your thoughts do. Thank you once again for joining us for the Silverlight Show. As we mentioned before, our entire income is based around our books. We do not want to ask for Patreon. It may have to be coming at some point, but right now, the philosophy of the show is the information is free. If we give something, we get something back. So, if you give us some money, we should give you something of value back, one of our books, or whatever the case may be. There might be a t-shirt line in the near future. I'm still looking at designs. After all that, thank you for listening, and I hope everyone has a fantastic day.